When Mum gets silent, it means trouble. The silence wasn't the kind that fills a room politely while someone searches for the right word. It had a temperature, low, steady, dangerous. It arrived at dinner like a weight and did what silence does best. It made everything else too loud. My fork scraped the plate. The television muttered in the other room. Outside, the street sounded ordinary. A car door, a dog 3 houses down, a neighbor sweeping his stoop. Inside, the silence had elbows. I suppose I should start with the thing that made the silence happen. A stupid choice, a late night, and a photo with the kind of caption that feels fleeting and then becomes a press release. We called it a harmless stunt. I called it brilliant in my head. Mostly I called it a way to get attention, something I'd been good at collecting for a few years, like a nervous coin collector. It was Friday, which is when the town breathes a little differently. The state fair was in town. The quad at school was the unofficial after-hours hangout. Someone had the idea to steal the mascot head from the pep shed, stuff it into a shopping cart, and parade it down Main Street wearing sunglasses and a vote for fun button. We ran, we laughed, we took a photo of the mascot head lounging on the steps of the library like a tourist. Someone, of course someone, posted it with a caption that read, "Mascot Vacation. YOLO, each a tradition who." It was 30 seconds of glory that looked in the cold early light like a serious joke and then like an act of disrespect. By noon, that photo had been shared across feeds and in archived screenshots. The principal's inbox filled. Mums texted other mums. The civic-minded parent in our neighborhood, the one who coordinated bake sales and school drives like a military planner, texted my mum in a color-coded fury. The caption hurt. But what hurt more was that we'd tagged the statue in a place kids had always approached with reverence to place flowers after the senior recital. For some people, tradition is a hinge. We'd borrowed the hinge, swung it wide, and laughed while it groaned. Mum found it because Karen, the civic-minded parent, sent our family photo to her with one line, "Is this your son?" I remember the way the message popped up on Mum's phone while she was sorting laundry. The photo was half a joke and half evidence. Mum turned the phone over, put it in her pocket, and kept folding. At dinner, she didn't say anything for a long time. It made me nervous in the way the eye of a storm makes the sea hush. You can feel movement everywhere, even when the air is oddly still. My sister, who was 3 years younger and blissfully detached from the kind of trouble I courted, whistled at something on the screen and then ducked to steal a fry. Mom folded napkins while I pretended the rhythm of my fork was the important thing. "Did you have a good day?" she asked finally, not looking up. The question was simple. The way she said it made me wish I'd fake a fever and go to bed early. My mouth had learned evasive maneuvers. "Yeah, Mom, busy. You know, school stuff." Her hand stopped. She glanced, up like someone who's heard a sound in a familiar landscape. Then she said, "Sit down." I felt my knees get hot. The world narrowed to the sound of the table settling, and the little scrape as her spoon reached the sugar jar. She did not ask about the photo. She did not accuse. She did not raise her voice. She did the thing that hurts more. She went quiet, in the middle of talking. "Come here," she said, not a command but an arrangement like a room being rehung. I put my fork down and moved into the living room where the couch likes to remember the exact curve of our shoulders. She sat me down and folded her hands like you fold paper into shapes that mean something. "Did you post that photo?" She asked. I lied first. It's a reflex you don't notice until it's gone wrong. "No," I said. It was small, like the lie had shrunk down to fit the moment. I thought if I kept my face composed enough, she'd accept it, and we could move into negotiations, perform contrition, do a favor, get a reduced sentence. She didn't answer immediately. Her silence lasted long enough for my brain to invent possibilities. Maybe she didn't hear me. Maybe she was thinking of a question she would ask if she wanted the truth without making me fold. Maybe she'd call my friends first and build a case. The silence made my pulse crank a notch. Then she stood and said, "I'm going to the school." The sentence was small. The shoes on her feet had always been sensible. Leather, flat, the kind that don't apologize for being practical. I remember the way she left the room, a quiet forward, a hinge of a movement that said she hadn't reached this moment without a mental ledger of options. She didn't yell, didn't storm, didn't wail. She walked like a person who'd begun to add. When she came back an hour later, she smelled like disinfectant and citrus, like the school janitor's closet after a weekend scrub. She sat down. Her hands were quiet in her lap. She had spoken to Principal Ellis and to Karen, I later learned. He had been factual. Karen had been pained. Mom listened, then made a decision that felt old and new all at once. She told me what she'd been told. The photo had gone to a lot of inboxes. The mascot's head had been returned, but not before someone had scratched it with a Sharpie, and a group of parents were demanding an apology that wasn't half-hearted. "You're going to be on stage," she said, "at the next town meeting. You'll explain yourself." In front of everyone? My voice sounded thin. My stomach found its native role as a troubled field. "In front of the PTA," she corrected. "In front of parents, yes, you did this in a public way. We will repair it in public. There are different kinds of punishment. Some are private, the needle thread of a corrective word whispered at home. Others are public, like theater designed. To leave a mark in the story other people tell about you. My mother's decision was public punishment, anchored in repair. She called it accountability. Others called it humiliation. To me, right then, it felt like both. We spent the next few days in a slow, awkward choreography. Mom made me write an apology on paper first. Not a social post, not a fleeting story, but a physical letter with the weight of ink. "Write who you hurt," she told me, "not what you feel about being caught. That part comes later." I wrote, with the clumsy sincerity of someone learning to translate selfishness into sentence form. I apologized to the mascot, silly, to the school, sincere, to the families who'd left notes there, humble. She read the letter and said, "Good." Then she asked me to add one thing, what I would do to repair the harm beyond words. We talked. She suggested I organize a cleanup and repair party for the quad statue, a fundraiser to fix the mascot head scratch, and a small speech for the PTA meeting to speak not like a comedian, but like someone who understands the nuance of belonging. I tried to argue that my friends should do it, that it was a prank gone wrong, not a moral failure. Her silence returned and flattened my counter-argument like a hand smoothing paper. "You chose to make a public joke," she said finally. "You chose to act like tradition meant nothing. Tradition matters because it holds people together. If you tear that even for a joke, you owe the mending. You'll do it publicly. You'll also be grounded for a month and volunteer every Saturday with the grounds crew." Grounded. That word carries the weight of childhood and the small gravity of being kept. It felt at once childish and reasonable. What made me angrier than the punishment itself was the exposure, that my private shame would be put on stage in front of people who had reputations and opinions. I had been flirting with attention. Now attention would be my sentence. The week before the PTA meeting, I painted benches and picked gum out of concrete with a tiny knife, while the grounds crew looked on without sarcasm. We handed out flyers and collected quarters for the fundraiser. We scrubbed marker off brick with elbow grease until my hands were raw and recognizable only by knuckles. The work was tedious and honest. It gave me an anchor. While my mouth could still craft smooth lies, my hands had to be blunt instruments. To repair. My mother stood at one end of a bench and watched, not with a scoreboard but with a quiet appraisal that made me want to do better. I suspect that's the real reason punishment sometimes works, because someone you respect becomes the judge and the repairer simultaneously. You don't want to disappoint. You don't want their silence again. The night of the PTA meeting arrived. Like a storm front, grey clouds of expectation, the auditorium smelling like chairs and coffee. Parents clustered. The principal gave a small practical speech about community standards and then stepped aside like a man who'd set the table and now wanted those present to eat. I stood behind the stage curtain and felt adrenaline move like a small animal in my chest. The curtain felt like skin separating truth from performance. Mom had told me to speak plainly, sit down, and then be ready to answer questions. She had promised to be in the front row. She'd also told me to dress decently, not to say anything that would sound like grandstanding. and to look people in the eye when I apologized. The choreography was exact. I had imagined the scene in quieter ways before. I'd imagined some people nodding because they appreciated my honesty. I'd imagined being forgiven. I'd imagined, absurdly, a few laughs that coyly acknowledged my youth. None of these fantasies accounted for the way humiliation settles into the bones when you're young, and visibility is not a chosen art. When I walked on stage, the spotlight was thinner than I'd expected. It picked out the newness of my shirt, the way my fingers shook. I looked out and saw faces that had been at my soccer games, at bake sales, at my work-study presentation. I saw Karen's face, crisp with satisfaction. I saw people whose opinions had weight. "I want to apologize," I said, the microphone making my voice fuller and also brittle. "I shouldn't have taken the mascot. I didn't think about the people who care, about our traditions, about the senior plaques, about the families who place flowers. I made a selfish choice for attention, and I'm sorry. I'm going to help fix what I broke." The speech was short. The real part was after, when questions came. "Why did you do it?" asked a woman who sounded like she coordinated everything. "Do you understand that it feels like disrespect?" I answered, the truth thinner than my mouth hoped. "I wanted to be funny," I said. "I didn't think about the harm. I do now." It wasn't a full confession. There was still the old self in me that had not yet learned the value of slow humility. The questions were not vicious. They were precise and sometimes kind. A father with a tie that matched his son's backpack asked about accountability. An older woman whose son had been the class treasurer complimented my willingness to help. Someone handed me a card with a check tucked inside for the mascot repair fund. It made my hands hot in a different way. There was shame in the attention. Yes, but also a particular kind of teaching that makes people share their rules out loud, so others can see them. After the PTA meeting, people came up to me and held out their hands. Some shook my hand with a smile that meant, "We'll check that you did as you promised." Others didn't shake my hand at all. My mother hugged me in the hallway, quiet and hard. She did not say it was okay. She didn't have to. Her silence had been the whole point, a pause big enough to let me think. The weeks that followed were a slow, stubborn grind through public repair. Saturdays were reserved for the grounds crew, pulling weeds, repainting the sign, sanding ahead of varnish. My hands learned the rhythm. I learned to be steady, to do the mundane work of fixing things. I answered emails from the parent who donated, confirming our plan for the mascot head to be taken to a specialty shop for repair, and suggested a small plaque be added to the base, acknowledging the event as a lesson in stewardship. I wrote blog posts for the school website about why traditions matter and how to question them responsibly. My grounding was enforced. My phone lived in a kitchen drawer until dinner. I learned to be bored in the evenings, and to live with that boredom rather than fill it with commentary. There were times when my pride rebelled. A friend dropped by with pizza and cracked jokes about how I was now known as the mascot thief. There's a dark humor in being reduced to a moment. The friends who laughed at first face value never quite stuck around for the months of work I did. The ones who did stayed and offered practical help. Someone to hold the ladder while I painted. Someone to carry the boxes of donations. Their friendship felt cleaner than the applause I'd previously craved. Slowly, the sting of visibility dimmed. People who had been furious were mollified by the sound of scrubbed concrete and repaired bronze. The mascot head came back shining. And for a while I watched people smile at it, with an extra layer of satisfaction. Not only because it looked new, but because they remembered that a young person had been held accountable and had actually done the labor to fix it. That is a small and strange redemption. The knowledge that something did not disappear because you asked it to. It got better because hands and time made it so. What the silence had taught me was not just that I would be punished for being reckless. That part was obvious. But that humility is not a single performative act. It's a slow correction, a list of daily unglamorous tasks that, when done, smooth out the ripples you caused. I learned to be patient in ways adolescence makes. Very difficult. I learned to answer the simple question, how do you fix this? I also learned something about my mother that surprised me. Her silence was not an empty weapon. It was a pause in which she weighed values. She wanted me to understand the gravity of being in the public eye and the responsibility that comes with the privilege of being known. She wanted me to be small enough to learn, large enough to act. After months of hard work, she said, once and only once, "I'm proud of you for showing up." That line was small and enormous. It didn't mean she forgave everything, or that the previous weeks were erased. It meant that the shape of us, of our family, of my choices, had been altered in a more durable way. The silence had been trouble. The work had been the answer. The two fit together like a sentence. As the year moved forward, the story of the mascot incident became one of those neighborhood folk tales, the kind you tell with a smirk and a lesson at the end. "Remember when he stole the mascot?" people would say, and then grin. I would grin too, but inside there was a map of what I had done and what I had repaired. The memory was not merely shameful. It was practical evidence of who I was becoming. If I were to give advice to my younger self sitting at that dinner table, I would say two things simply and mean them. Don't ever underestimate the power of silence from someone who loves you, and learn to do the hard work before anyone tells. You two, the first will make you stop. The second will make you grow. The silence returns sometimes in small, private ways. When I hesitate at a crosswalk and check my phone less. When I volunteer to pick up the community hall keys. When I put my sister's laundry back in the basket. Instead of leaving it in a pile, it is there. A reminder not of punishment, but of stewardship. Trouble comes sometimes from silence, yes, but it can also be the prelude to an unexpected kind of care. Years later, I still pass the mascot in the quad and run my hand across the bronze where it has been subtly smoothed. The little plaque by the base, the one we added after the repair, reads simply, "Restoration takes work." I look at it and think of a lesson delivered not by shouting, but by a quiet, serious hand. My mother's silence was the bell that called me back. The work that followed was the bell's echo that stayed.